Oh, thank you very much for being here, everyone. It's so nice to have people online and in person as well. I was speaking to some of you before, and a lot of my own work I do remotely, so being in the room with other people always feels like quite a treat. So thank you very much for your time today, first of all. So today we're going to talk a little bit about disability inclusion and how we can build a better world. Now, the audience for this session is a bit of a mixed bag. So we've got disabled people, we've got non-disabled people. And in my head, I wanted to kind of create something where anybody who is perhaps new to disability or non-disabled and perhaps wants to know how they can help, I wanted to share some practical solutions, talk about some of the common barriers we experience and ways we can overcome that. But I am going to have a natter about my own experiences as well and tell you a bit about me. And yeah, there will be time for questions at the end as well. So if you have any, please don't leave me high and dry. So I have kind of done a quick overview there, but today we are going to become better acquainted with the disability community and all of this unique power that's within it. This can be a little bit uncomfortable, but we are going to talk about unconscious bias and internalised ableism because we all have it, including me. Then we're going to identify some of the practical and social barriers that are currently excluding disabled people from community spaces. We have people from all over the UK on this session, but I am going to have a particular focus on York for this one. We're then going to discuss some actionable solutions to those barriers that people can genuinely implement. We're going to talk about what you can do in the here and now and what you can encourage other people to do as well. And then, like I said, we will have a Q&A session at the end. So first things first, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about me and my background. My name is Pippa Stacey. I'm a disabled writer, blogger, content creator. I do a bit of everything, and I also work as a communication consultant in the charity sector. I have a particular interest in inclusive education and employment, especially for people with chronic illnesses and energy limiting conditions like my own. So I haven't always been a disabled person. I acquired my disability. I started with the symptoms of my chronic illness when I was about 14, 15 years old. Like lots of other young people going through that experience, I wasn't sure whether what I was experiencing was real at all. I went to the doctor over and over again and kind of tried to verbalise this really weird experience I was having where I always felt unwell, and I didn't really know how to describe it other than to say I feel really, really tired, which any of you who happen to have ME will know is like the biggest understatement ever. And I was constantly told by my GP, oh, it's nothing serious, it's probably just in your head, maybe it's just hormones or stress over exams. And that went on for 4 years. So not a good time, would not recommend. But eventually, after one major relapse in a foreign country, I was diagnosed with ME. I finally got that referral to a specialist, and I was very fortunate in that I got a quick diagnosis, which isn't the experience that everybody has. So I've been living with ME now I've had the diagnosis for almost 10 years. My 10-year anniversary is coming up, and I will be celebrating with cake. But yes, so I've had to learn to adapt to that, and again, I am very privileged in that I have experienced some improvement, and my quality of life compared with how it was back then is worlds away, and I'm very, very lucky in that sense. So I kind of got into this world through blogging, weirdly enough. I started a little blog. I've always loved to write, and sharing my experiences online is what has opened up so many doors for me. And kind of led me to the work I do now with charities, with individuals, and it's kind of led me to be sitting here today. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, if we have other disabled people in the room, this will not be this will not be new information to you, but often we come up against this idea that when we talk about disabled people, we're just talking about a select few. People still seem to see it as this tiny minority. And the reality is that the latest figures estimate that there are around 16 million disabled people in the UK, and that number is only going to rise. It's currently around 24% of the population, but there will be people with chronic illnesses like mine who probably aren't diagnosed yet, so that number could be a lot higher. And of that population, over 80% of these people will have a non-visible or a less visible disability. So some of you who are in the room today or who know me online, you might see that I use a wheelchair sometimes, but I don't always use a wheelchair. I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user, which means I use mobility aids on some days to help me manage my condition and to do more of the things that I want or need to do. And other days, my disability is a lot less visible. So in the work I do and in the stuff I share, I always want to be mindful and inclusive of this entire spectrum and ensure that when we're talking about disabled people, we're not just talking about that stereotypical image of the wheelchair user, although of course that's incredibly important, but we're also talking about that broader spectrum as well. Because for a long time, I was that person who was very much struggling to get through the day, but when you looked at me, I just looked like any other teenager. So it's always something I'm very mindful of. So I thought we would start off this session today by tackling some assumptions. So as some of you will probably know, we still live in a society that kind of puts non-disabled people as the norm, and anything that deviates from that is seen as something abnormal. So when we hear the word disability, we often see people thinking, oh, that's such a tragedy, that's so sad that they're disabled, that's so sad that that's happened to them, what an awful thing. But we are seeing some progress in that area, but the fact that people still have these negative assumptions is very much rooted in ableism. And again, I'm sure some of you will know, but ableism is a term that refers to discrimination in favour of non-disabled people. So when we talk about ableism, we are positioning non-disabled people as the norm and seeing anything less than that as something less, something other than that as less. And that's what we need to tackle. Ableism can be seen in policy and practice, in education, employment, healthcare settings, and ableism can also be internalised by us as individuals as well. And that's something that I personally didn't learn for a very long time after acquiring my condition. So, assumption number one that you might have come up against in your own life too, or if you're non-disabled people, this might be one that you hear a lot, or you might think, I'm sorry. Some people say, well, disabled people are just a minority group. They've got their own stuff going on. They've got their own leisure activities. They've got their own services. So why should we be making ours inclusive if they've got their own? And the reality is that disability, yes, it's a marginalised group, but it's a marginalised group that any person can become a part of at any time. It's not this rare or abnormal thing. It is something that is probably going to affect every single person in the world at some point or another, whether that's them becoming disabled or caring for a disabled person. And obviously, lots of us are just living independent lives, and we don't want to be othered or seen as something separate or something different. Yes, there may be specialist services or adjustments that we do prefer, or there may be situations where these are required. But for the most part, we do just want to go about our lives and engage with our hobbies and interests in the same way that anybody else would. And that's why it's important that we're making the world as a whole more accessible, rather than seeing disability as something that's just neatly cast off to one side and self-contained. That's what we don't want. Assumption number two. Well, disabled people are inspirational. They've got all this strength and determination, so surely they can find a way around the barriers they face. Oh, not a fan, not for me. It is very much true that disabled people, we do have to be resilient. We learn to be resilient, to put up with all the stuff we have to deal with on a daily basis. But that doesn't mean that the onus should be solely on us for fixing the problems in the world around us. Often it is the case that disabled people are doing the brunt of the work, and that's why we desperately need allies to stand with us as well. Because fixing ableism and inaccessibility in the world around us is a task that falls to all of us. And often it's the people who have the most limited energy and resources that tend to end up doing the bulk of the work, which, again, very much not ideal and needs to change. And like I said here, nothing will ever change unless non-disabled allies are willing to advocate for us too. And whether you're here in person or on the online audience, I'm very grateful that there are non-disabled allies here, and I really hope there's going to be practical stuff that you can take away from this session. Assumption number three. The spending power of disabled people is limited, so why should we invest in accessibility and inclusion? Now, this is the finding that often blows people's minds. The worldwide spending power of disabled people and their households is estimated to be worth $8 trillion. That's a lot of dollars. And this figure is known as the purple pound, and it's increasing by about 14% each year. And despite this, and despite all of the lucrative opportunities within this, it's still the case that only 10% of businesses have a targeted strategy for engaging with the disability community. Again, very much needs to change. Now, the reason I talk about this and the reason there's a picture of me looking very pleased with myself while I have my breakfast is because I think customer loyalty comes into play when we're talking about making services and venues and opportunities inclusive for disabled people too. So if an organisation or a small business does something or goes out of their way to make their premises accessible for disabled people, it's often the case that we feel very loyal to that venue or that provider. So if we know that somebody has made that effort and they've made themselves accessible to us, and they also do a really great thing to start with, like cooking a very delicious breakfast like they do at Partisan in York, if anybody needs a recommendation, it's often the case that we will become loyal to them. And also, disabled people talk. We will spread the word. We will likely have friends who are looking for that very thing. And if we have a positive experience somewhere, you can absolutely guarantee that we're going to tell people about it. It's also the case that if we have a negative experience somewhere, we're probably going to tell people about it as well. But I often think that small businesses and local organisations in particular don't realise that by making this small change, it's not necessarily that you're just catering for one person, although that alone should be a reason to do it. It's also the case that you're opening up your organisation to a whole new target market, which it's not only the right thing to do, but it could also make a lot of business sense for your organisation as well. And like I said there, when we're talking about accessibility and inclusion for disabled people, we shouldn't just see it as an afterthought, and we definitely shouldn't be seeing it as a good deed or just something nice to do. Because the thing I want you to take away from this more than any other is disabled people's joy matters as well. And I'm a big advocate for this. I don't believe we should have to settle for less just because we have a medical condition or we're dealing with disability in whatever form that may take. And it's often the case as though people seem to imply sometimes that we should just be happy with what we have, or that we should just accept the scraps of accessibility and just take what we can get. When in reality, we want to be creating a world that means that disabled people can experience all the joy as well. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about barriers and solutions. So I've briefly touched on the fact that accessibility issues exist, but let's delve into what these issues actually are and what people can potentially do to resolve them. Now, this segment has very much been geared towards non-disabled people who want to learn how to do better. I'm very aware there will be disabled people in the room and watching online who are thinking, well, I already have to do all of this, I'm not doing anything else. And that's totally, totally valid. Anything you can do is more than enough. So it may be that you can tell a non-disabled person who wants to know how they can help. It might be that you can pass some of this on to them instead. So the biggie, first of all, is physical accessibility. This is probably one of the biggest barriers that I experience as somebody who uses mobility aids and who has a chronic illness. We also live in York, which is a beautiful historic city, but definitely comes with its fair share of access challenges. You should have seen my old wheelchair on cobbles, it was quite something. So when I talk about this, I do want to be really mindful of the fact that York has a lot of great independent and small businesses, and these businesses are going through really tough times at the minute. And it's not as though there's this unlimited budget that people can tap into to make accessibility adjustments. So I do want to be mindful of that, of course, in any sort of conversation of this nature. But when we think about improving physical access to premises, there might be more solutions out there than you might think. Something that I often come up against, and I'm sure it's the case for lots of you as well, people will sometimes say, oh, well, it's a listed building, or it's got this, or it's got this. And sometimes it feels as though that is an excuse for not trying at all. Obviously, there are cases where people genuinely, their hands are tied and they can't do anything, but I just don't think that should be a reason that shuts down the conversation entirely. So, stating the obvious here, but for wheelchair users, there are ramps. Obviously, permanent ramps are the best solution because they allow for more autonomy. A big pet peeve of mine that I appreciate can't be avoided, but I don't like when you have to take all these additional measures to get somebody to put a ramp down. If you have to ring a doorbell and wait for 10 minutes and have the whole hoo-ha about putting ramps down, yes, you can physically get in, but you sometimes are made to feel like a bit of a burden in the process. But I appreciate that's sometimes the only option. So like I say, permanent ramps are best, but there are portable and modular ramps too, and there are more out there than ever before. I've been on a bit of a mission lately to convince local businesses to invest in portable ramps. I've even brought the leaflets with me today in case you know of somebody who might be interested in a portable ramp. But there is a great organisation called ramps.co.uk, and they specialise in lightweight ramps that are suitable for small businesses. They're not big or bulky to lift up or put down, they're quite easy to store, and they have got a 10% discount on that leaflet. So if you are interested, they're at a decent price point anyway, but if you are interested, the leaflets are here. If anybody on the online chat wants that discount, if you just contact ramps.co.uk, they will sort you out with that. And yeah, I had particular luck with a really lovely small business called Rainbow Ceramics. I'm sure some of you will know them well. They were already really mindful of disability inclusion, and they have now got a portable ramp, which means that I can go and paint ceramics with my friends, which, again, joy, brings all of the joy. I'm not very good at the painting part, but I like the experience, and that's what matters. And just on that, again, stating the obvious for some of you, I'm sure, but please don't offer to carry somebody upstairs or inside. Offering to carry a wheelchair user is not a substitute for basic accessibility measures. It's often unsafe, it's undignified, it's embarrassing, and it comes up as a suggestion that people offer more than you might expect in this day and age. So please don't offer to carry somebody upstairs. There will definitely be a better solution than that. Now, of course, when we're talking about physical accessibility, I'm only talking from my lived experiences as somebody who uses mobility aids and has a chronic illness. Like I said before, there are people who have chronic illnesses or disabilities who don't necessarily use mobility aids. This is Wilma, by the way, if any of you are in the room with me. This is Wilma the Wilsey too. She's a life changer. But for people who don't use mobility aids, they might struggle with standing and walking for longer periods of time. Something that can be really helpful and that's really easy to implement is offering additional seating, especially in the queue areas, or even offering like a queue jump system for people who self-disclose or who are wearing a sunflower lanyard. Quiet areas or sessions for people with sensory overwhelm. Again, this can sometimes be a result of chronic illness. It can be a result of neurodivergence. And quiet areas or just like chill out zones can make a world of difference for people in those environments. And I'm not qualified to speak on this because I don't have lived experience, but there are loads of other measures. So things like providing menus or information in alternative formats, and just making sure that you're engaging with the relevant members of the disability community who have experiences that differ from my own. So you want to be consulting with people who have visual impairments, people who have hearing impairments, and making sure you've got all your bases covered, essentially. There are always little things that we can all do. Digital accessibility is something I'm quite passionate about as well. So when a business owner is thinking about engaging with the disability community, you want to think about if your website and social media platforms are accessible. And if a disabled person clicked onto those sites, would they know that they are welcome in this space too? So as a bare minimum in 2024, we should all be adding burned-in captions to video content. We should be making sure that there are captions on screen. This has been shown to have immense benefits, not only for people with hearing loss, but for just engaging non-disabled people with video content as well. And you always want to be adding alt text to your social media images. And I think that's the case even if you're not doing it in a business or a professional sense, even if you're using social media platforms in a personal capacity, adding alt text and getting into the habit of that is really, really key. I'm going to have a drink of water, bear with. I'll spare you all my very attractive coughing if it gets to that stage. I'll leave that here, actually. Another biggie, especially in the world we live in now, is considering how people can engage with the business or the service that you're offering remotely. So for many, many years, chronically ill people, a good proportion of the chronically ill community have struggled to leave the house because of their condition. That has increased tenfold since COVID. People are still having to live with distancing and shielding. And just offering remote opportunities or just things that make this community feel catered for can be so powerful. And again, the remote things are often seen as though they should be seen as like an add-on or a bonus rather than essential. But if there's anything you can do to offer your services, whether that's a key service, whether it's entertainment, whether it's like book talks or online lectures or just anything of that nature, being seen like that and knowing that you've been catered for can mean the absolute world to some people. I'm very lucky to be able to get out of the house, and even I just feel so seen when people offer that. So it's really important to consider how you might be able to implement that in the work that you're doing. And yes, if you have the budget, and again, I'm very conscious that small businesses don't always have the budget, but it's really key to consult with a web accessibility specialist if you can. And if you do that, having somebody with lived experience, employ somebody with lived experience because they know what they're doing, they're good at their jobs, and they often spot things that other people might not. So that's really key as well. This one is very close to my heart. So communication and social attitudes. So if you're speaking to somebody and you're not familiar with disabled people, it's really important to avoid making assumptions and infantilizing people. Again, I'm sure I'm not alone in this experience, but I do get infantilized quite a lot. And the key rule, somebody said this to me once and it's really stuck with me. If in doubt, presume competence. Always presume competence. The number of times I've been talked to like a 2-year-old, and not just because I wear dungarees a lot, it's a problem. Obviously, really important, really easy to do. Ensure people feel welcome when they're engaging with your space. As disabled people, we are often made to feel like a bit of a burden or an inconvenience just as we're going about our lives. So sometimes even just a warm welcome and not making a fuss, but just a genuine, nice, warm welcome can make all the difference as well. Oh, please don't ask somebody about their disability story or medical history unless they offer that information themselves. The number of times I'll be going about my day and somebody will stop me and they'll want a TED talk on my disability and how I've ended up here today buying my cereal. It's a nightmare. I was in London for work the other day, and I was just sending a parcel. I was just doing an errand, and had a really nice chat with the guy. It's all good, it's all fine. And then he stops and he goes, "Can I ask you a question?" And I thought, oh God, here we go. And he goes, "Why do you use the chair?" And I said, "Chronic illness." And I just said it in a way that, doesn't really encourage further conversation. And then he went on this whole spiel about how if you believe you'll get better, you will. And I've never done this before. I just stopped talking. I just stopped answering. I was like, I'm not engaging with this. I didn't feel well. I don't have the energy to deal with this today. So I just stopped talking. I literally just said thank you and goodbye. And I'm going out of the store and he's going, "I believe you will get better." And just don't do it. Seriously, don't do it. It was a lovely interaction before then. It's just so pointless. And again, avoid giving unsolicited advice. I can guarantee, everybody thinks that they have got the key that's going to solve your disability. Even if they have no medical background, no knowledge of your condition, they always think that their thing is going to be the thing that solves it. And I can guarantee we will have heard it before. I hate to break it to you, but we will have heard it before. I've done the green juice, I've done the cold water swimming, I've had somebody banging gongs over my head, and I'm still like this. So yeah, just avoid the unsolicited advice. We live in Yorkshire, there are so many other things we can talk about instead. I will happily talk about the weather instead. If there's the opportunity, I think it's really important to engage with learning opportunities, especially when they're delivered by disabled people. I had very little knowledge of disability before I became disabled myself, and if it weren't for the online disability community, I might never have known about different disabilities and different lived experiences from my own. So although I consider myself an expert in my condition and my lived experiences, following people who've had different upbringings or they're living with different access barriers, it's just incredible how much you can learn just from following people on social media. So I definitely encourage you to follow a diverse range of people online and you will learn so much. I also think if you're in a customer facing role, it's really important that you've got some inclusive language training under your belt. Customer experience training, disability equality training. It's so important that you're routinely doing that because it's a fast moving world as well and things change. I know that inclusive language training, this is something that I deliver myself, and something that I often come up against is people feeling quite overwhelmed by inclusive language. Like they think there's just this hard, fast set of rules that like, this is what you say and this is what you don't say. But in my experience, once you help people to understand the why behind why certain phrases are preferred and others are less preferred, it really does stick in their head, and that becomes much easier to remember day to day. So I'd encourage you not to be intimidated by inclusive language training. It can make a world of difference, and it's a lot easier to get the hang of than you might think. Marketing and information provision. So again, as I'm sure lots of you will know, finding reliable accessibility information online can be really difficult. And when you can't find that information easily, the burden often falls on the individual to go and hunt out that information themselves. And again, it's the people who've got limited time and energy that are having to spend it like calling people, emailing people, chasing information that would have been so easy to provide online. Yeah, I have had experiences of being totally assured that somewhere's accessible and step-free. I've gone there and then found out that that's completely incorrect. But handily enough, it was in Dundee. I travelled to Dundee and the place wasn't accessible, so would not recommend that. Yeah, just to reiterate, that access info should be made clear and easy to find online, again, because it just takes so much of the burden off the individual, having to do like a forensic research exercise to find out if a place is step-free. Yeah, so providing as much information as you can is key. If you have them, images are really useful to include as well. And the other thing I would say to any small businesses who are starting on this journey of making adjustments and improving accessibility is don't be afraid to shout about the things you're doing well. Like the more you spread the word, the more of that new community that you're going to be able to engage. And I do think it's really important to champion the people who are doing what they can with what they have. Not everybody has the budget or the resources to do everything and make it absolutely perfect. And it's very difficult to achieve perfect accessibility anyway. So yeah, I would encourage people not to be afraid of shouting about the stuff that you're doing well and the learning that you're doing along the way. I will mention as well, I am biased here because I do some work for this organisation, but there is a brilliant organisation called Accessable. They produce detailed access guides for thousands of venues across the UK, and they basically provide really thorough, comprehensive information that caters for different kinds of disabilities. And it's delivered by trained surveyors, which makes the difference. So disabled people know that that is information that they can trust. And right, everybody cross your fingers now that this works. We have a message from Accessable CEO Dr. Gregory Burke. It's only a couple of minutes long, and I'm going to click.
Listening to the lived experience and expertise of disabled people is at the heart of everything Accessable does. For over 20 years, everything we do, from the information we collect to the design of our website, has been decided through engagement with disabled people. Over the past few years, we've seen increasing numbers of disabled people contacting us to say they face a postcode lottery when it comes to accessibility information. People are disappointed that their area or place they want to visit has no or inadequate accessibility information. Many of us at Accessable live that same frustration and disappointment. All of us are determined to do something about it. But finding a way to do that has not been easy. Over the past 18 months, we've done a lot of hard thinking, comprehensive trials, and made a significant financial investment to find a solution. We are now ready. We are so excited to announce the launch of the Your Accessibility Guide portal and the option of guided assessment for micro businesses and for small or medium-sized businesses. We believe this portal could deliver a dramatic step change in the provision of high-quality accessibility information across the UK. You can help us demand that change. Help us spread the word about the portal. Tell those places and spaces that you visit about it. Encourage them to join. I'll be asking the venues I visit to do it, not because it makes financial sense, although it does, not because it helps them meet their legal obligations, although it will, not because it will help them market their venue to a new audience, even though we can help them reach millions. I'll be asking them to do it because it is the right thing to do, because the experience of every customer counts, and because they can be part of a step change of including disabled people. Imagine other disabled people knowing about that restaurant which you always love to go to. You can make that happen. Or imagine finding a new place to visit because another disabled person told them to publicise their access. Just imagine that happening thousands of times over, all across the country. What a huge social difference we can make. Your support, your voice can make this great. Thank you.
I'm so pleased that worked. Yeah, so that was a very brief introduction to the work that Accessable does. In the past, historically, they've focused on big venues that kind of have the budget to do these big, like, accessibility audits across all their stores in the UK. But the launch of this new thing called Your Accessibility Guide means that they're finding ways of providing that support to smaller and local businesses as well, and helping them to deliver that same quality of information in a way that's more budget friendly or more suitable for their needs. Okay, and I think this is the last one in this area, but just a couple of points on responding to feedback. So if you're a non-disabled person and you've tried, you've made some changes, and sometimes there's this worry that if they start on this journey, they're going to be held to impossible standards, or they're going to be criticised for doing anything as though it's not enough. And yeah, there can be this really big fear of getting it wrong, and sometimes that prevents non-disabled people from taking action at all. Yeah, people worry, especially in the online culture that we have at the minute, people think they're going to get called out or they're going to get cancelled. But the point I want to reiterate is that the only time there is this conflict is when a business has done something, a disabled person has provided feedback, and then the business has taken offence or clapped back at that disabled person. That's the only real time that things like this will escalate. So I don't really think that this is something that people should fear, because it's very unlikely that that will happen if you are responding to feedback from disabled people in the right way. So if a disabled person does provide you with feedback that isn't as positive as you'd hoped, it can be really disheartening because it might feel as though you have done what you can. But it's really important to remember that the disabled person's lived experiences qualify them to provide this feedback much more than your perceptions as a non-disabled person. And having that feedback at all is a really valuable tool. And yeah, it's very rarely coming from a malicious place. Like, we don't all sit at home being keyboard warriors and wanting to take down anybody who's trying to do their bit. And yeah, sometimes there can be this attitude that as disabled people, we should be grateful for the scraps, that we should be grateful that people have even tried at all. When in reality, again, I really like this phrase. I heard it once and I thought, yeah, I really like that. The best thing that somebody can say to disabled people who've provided feedback is say, I hear you, thank you for the feedback, and I'll make sure I take this on board. It's shown that you've been heard, and it shows that they are going to take action going forward. It's as simple as that. And yeah, I think we've talked about all these different barriers and all these different intricacies in the community, but for a lot of us, the biggest barrier of all in the society we live in is simply not being seen, not being recognised, not having our access needs met. And I think it's just the idea of being an afterthought that is often the biggest barrier of all. So again, knowing that as an organisation is doing what they can to make a difference, that alone can be a really empowering thing. So I do just want to reiterate that taking some action, taking any action, is better than taking no action at all. So again, if you take one more thing away from this today, let this be your sign to think about what you can realistically do with what you have to make the work you're doing, or the premises you have, or your everyday interactions in society. How might you make them more inclusive, and how might you make disabled people feel more at the forefront of your mind as well? Because that's the way that we're truly going to create an inclusive world and have the inclusion revolution that we're all hoping for. It's coming any day now, I can sense it. So yeah, and this is just a call to action to keep on learning and engaging if you can. I really appreciate those of you who've spent this time with me today. So don't forget to include disability in your actions, your marketing strategy, and your activism. It's really key that if you're going to mark key moments on the calendar, things like International Women's Day, Black History Month, Pride, LGBTQ+ History Month, all of which you absolutely should, then don't forget to honour the disability campaigns too, because often they are just conveniently left off, and they are fabulous as well. So two of the biggest ones, there's Disability Pride Month, that's coming up in July next month. There's Disability History Month in December, and there are lots more, but if there are two that you need to know, it's those two. And again, I've touched on this a lot, but please don't let the fear of not knowing stop you from trying. Don't let an inability to make vast improvements stop you from making any improvements at all. Nobody can change the world in one fell swoop, although that would be nice. So doing what we can is the most important thing of all. I am going to move on to questions shortly, but yeah, I will just say again, thank you very much for listening so far. I really appreciate it. You can find me here. If you're in the room, I've brought my books along. I'm not a salesperson. I'm not gonna pitch my books to you, but you're very welcome to come and have a look. There are that's my brain going. There are leaflets from the Ramps company with a discount code on there too. Please take them. And there are also goodies. I've got free bookmarks. I've got free stickers. I've got free badges. Go for your life. And like I said, I'm not going to try and push anything on you, so don't worry about that. But I am going to open up the floor to questions now. If you're watching at home, feel free to ask any questions as well, because I have got the chat box here, and I'll start with a couple in the room if anybody has any. Don't leave me hanging. Thank you very much for listening so far. We've got a microphone.
Hi, could you tell us a bit more about the inclusive language training?
Yeah, so just to repeat the question for anybody who didn't hear, can you tell us a bit more about the inclusive language training? So this is something I offer through my role as a communication consultant, and essentially it's designed for businesses and non-disabled people who want to learn more about not just the language use, not just the terminology, but about the different narratives and the different metaphors behind disability and unpicking the ableism that's within a lot of them. So my particular focus, I don't do it pan-disability, so I don't speak at length on things like visual impairments and hearing impairments. I really do believe that you should go to experts in the field to have the training in each of these areas. But the areas I tend to cover are things like disability, using mobility aids, chronic illness, energy limiting conditions, things like the right things to say, avoiding the unsolicited advice, the narratives around being a warrior or a superhero and how that might be interpreted by somebody. And the sessions are usually about 40 minutes in length. We have a good time doing them. We have a good chat. It's quite an interactive session. So yeah, that's something I offer. I do offer it through an organisation called Astrid, who I work for, but I also offer it in a personal capacity as well. Any other questions? I'll try and get the chat box up online. That's not the mouse, that's the clicker. Oh, hang on. Q&A, lovely. Any more in the room before I go on to the online ones? Go for it.
Are you happy to repeat it?
Yeah, no problem.
My takeaways from that were largely to do with advice and actions that can be helpful for people in more of like the private sector, so small businesses and commercial areas. I work for a public sector organisation, so I guess the question is that advice different for if you're trying to make similar changes in a public sector organisation, and if so, how would it differ?
Yeah, so the question was essentially how might my advice differ between the public sector and the private sector? And I think the ideas that underpin them both are the same, but if there are public sector organisations that are bigger and are more prominent, I always try and encourage them to do more and go further. So if there is the budget, I do think that budget should be put aside specifically for inclusion and ongoing learning. So the things that I would encourage a small business owner to do, like things like ensuring premises are accessible and having the disability equality training, I would see as a non-negotiable for the public sector, the bigger organisations. But thank you for asking. It makes me happy that you've asked that. Thank you. I will go to a couple of the online ones. Again, that's not the mouse. The mouse is here. Okay, let's have a look. So this one says, Pippa, I know you had a horrible experience in a restaurant in York where a waiter challenged you for using a wheelchair because you were able to get downstairs to a toilet. If someone else had an experience like that, what should they do? I forgot about that actually. That was a couple of years ago. That was a fun day. Yes, so like I said, the fact that I am an ambulatory wheelchair user, the fact that people see me using mobility aids, but also see me standing up and crossing my legs, they either think they're witnessing some kind of miracle or they think I'm faking it. It's either one of the two generally. And I know that being in those situations, it can feel really difficult to know what to do at the time. I'm not the most assertive person, so I don't always stand up for myself in the way that I should. If someone else has an experience like that, if you have the confidence to stand up and challenge it, then absolutely do so. You are completely within your rights to do that, and it doesn't have to be nasty or confrontational. I'm really working on having like phrases in my back pocket that I can just whip out in those situations. Things like, what would I say to that one?
Question is parentage.
Say it again.
Fault that, sorry.
Go on, say it again.
Question is parentage. I'm ex-army, I'm a little more robust with my responses and they usually involve procreation.
And I'm sure there's something we can all learn from that. Oh no. Yeah, I think just I think the thing I always say to people is don't feel bad if you don't feel able to challenge it in the moment. You've got to preserve your peace. You've got to look after your limited energy. So it might be, I think, I'm trying to remember what I did in this case. This was a good few years ago now. I definitely didn't challenge it in person, but I think I sent a complaint. It was a chain. It was a well-known pizza chain that wasn't Pizza Express. That was Pizza. I was going to try and be funny, but yes, it was Pizza Express. And I sent feedback to their customer service team, and like, you might not have been able to challenge it in the moment, but that will have got taken back, and hopefully they will have done something about it. And I have eaten there since and not had similar problems. So. Oops. This session is being recorded, so if you do want to hear it again, I'm sure we will find ways of doing that. Outside of cities and businesses, what advice would you give to environmental organisations or outdoor businesses about accessibility? Outdoor businesses, I love an off-road mobility aid. I want everybody to get off-road mobility aids. It brings so much joy to my life. Things like trampers, off-road wheelchairs, it's the best thing ever, and it's just incredible to see more like National Trust properties and more like places of local interest getting these things, because even if you have a decent power chair like I do now, it can be very tricky to navigate those spaces and spend that quality time in nature outdoors. So as well as all of the typical advice about ensuring like your premises are accessible, off-road mobility aids, again, I know they're not the cheapest thing, but they will bring people flocking into your organisation. I've planned entire holidays around where they've got trampers. It's just the best thing ever.
What's a tramper?
Oh, a tramper is like, it's like a big off-road mobility scooter. So it's a big chunky thing and you sit in it and it's got handlebars. And you kind of drive it with your hands, but it can get over rugged surfaces a lot easier than a mobility aid might. And they're not as hard to drive as you might think, actually. I don't have a lot of spatial awareness, so I'm not the best driver, but yeah, they're very easy to use, and it's a feeling like nothing else. It's so good. So I'm always there doing my emails, encouraging people to get more stuff like that in. That's all of the questions online, and we still have a bit of time, so I will go back to the room once more. Go for it.
I know there's quite an active online disability community, and you've recommended listening to people's stories and interacting as much as possible. Do you have any people that you'd recommend we check out or hear more from?
So the question was, there's a brilliant online disability community. Are there particular people you would recommend checking out? I'm not going to do this justice because I will forget people, and not to be self-promotional, but there is a list of those people in that yellow book over there, How to Do Life with a Chronic Illness. Who do I really like online? Kate Stanforth shares her experiences of chronic illness, and she's also an incredible dancer who's a wheelchair user. Charlie Clement shares really great stuff about being neurodivergent. Who else is there? Some of you might know Jessica Kellgren-Fozard. She's quite a well-known YouTuber. She has chronic illnesses and she has a hearing impairment. Who else? There's a great organisation called Chronically Brown who shares sort of like the intersection between chronic illness and being of South Asian descent, so they're doing really important work. Again, if you follow Accessable, there are lots of ambassadors for Accessable, and they are very pan-disability. It's like a massive... are you an Accessable ambassador, Beth? I can't remember. Oh, well, you should be. You should be. let me put a word in. So if you go on Accessable's website, you'll find Accessable ambassadors, and there's a massive list of people on there from all over the UK. I'll definitely be forgetting people, but that's just a few to get you started. Thank you for asking, good question. I'll do one more call online. Any of you who are watching, thank you very much for your kind words as well. If anybody online wants to ask any other questions, we've got a couple more minutes. Anybody else? Yep, go for it.
I've been trying to find information to support employees who want to access the Access to Work scheme, and I wondered if you had any. I've been unable to find people's actual experience of using Access to Work as a means for getting support, so I'd be really interested in any experience you've got to share or knowledge, information about that.
So much. Yeah, it's a really topical issue at the minute, and it's not made easy for people to access that support. The question was anything around Access to Work and how to find people's personal stories. I was actually thinking of putting something together in that very area, actually, so that's a good call to action for me. I work for an organisation called Astrid, and we match talented people with chronic illnesses with inclusive employment opportunities. We're doing a lot of stuff in this area at the minute, so keep an eye on that. There's a great friend of mine called Chronically Jenny, and she's posting loads of videos on YouTube about the experience of going through Access to Work as somebody with a chronic illness. It's often the case that people don't know what they can ask for. They don't know what support they might be entitled to. Especially when lots of us have experienced medical gaslighting and we're made to feel as though like we're not as disabled as we think we are. If it's any help for anybody in the room or anybody listening online, I have Access to Work as somebody who's self-employed, and although I won't lie, the process is intense. The things I have access to now are things like I have a job aid for a couple of hours a week to help me do the tasks I find more difficult. I have a certain number of taxi journeys funded per month to help me get to spaces as somebody who can't drive. I've got certain equipment, like I've got a chair for working from home. I've got certain recording equipment that is easier on my hands. I also have a condition that affects my hands. I don't talk about it that much, but so it's easier in that sense as well. And what else do I have? You can apply for coaching. Business coaching, you can apply for equipment that's specific to your job role and what you do. Things like dictation software, like voice to text, text to speech. So yeah, really research what's out there because they don't make that information readily available. So the more lived experiences you can find, the better. And again, I suppose it's just searching through individuals' experiences, people who are blogging about it, speaking about it. But I might try and compile a little list actually, if that's helpful. And I'll definitely be sharing more of my own experiences on that in the future. But yeah, my heart goes out to anybody who's navigating it at the minute. it's really tough, but in my experience, it's worth persevering for, definitely.
Okay, that's great, thank
The
you.
waiting list is long. It can take up to 12 months.
Yeah.
It's quite frustrating.
Yeah.
Because some people get, during their probationary period, they lose the opportunity in their job. I've seen too many people.
Yeah, 100%. 100%, yeah. The waiting lists are incredibly long, and even if it's urgent. So I've recently done, what's it called, a change in circumstances. Again, I'm very privileged. I managed to get some funding for this power chair because my other one completely like packed in, and I do need my power chair to do parts of my job. But yeah, the waiting lists are months and months at a time. If you do have an urgent issue, one of the best things you can do is request regular progress updates. Again, it's labour on the individual, so it's not perfect, but requesting weekly updates. And if they're not getting back to you with those updates, my advocate put in a formal complaint, and up to that point it had taken, I think, maybe like 3 months to do my change in circumstances. They put that complaint in the morning, and 2 hours later I had a response. So don't rule out doing the complaint if that's what you have to do to get it sorted for an urgent issue. Yes, definitely a tricky system, but yeah, Godspeed to anybody going through it. Just checking I've not missed any. I'm not going to specifically reference the last one, but yes. Okay, I think, I think we've covered them all, and we're coming up to about 20 past. So one last call. I think I'm really grateful that you've asked questions today. This can be a little bit awkward, this bit, so go for it.
You mentioned a sunflower lanyard.
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with it, the sunflower is kind of like, there we go, we've got a beautiful demonstration of one in the room. The sunflower is kind of a symbol of a hidden or a less visible disability. So if you see somebody wearing a sunflower lanyard or having like a sunflower card, I think they do now as well, it's a symbol that that person might have a disability or might have access requirements that you don't know about or that aren't immediately visible. They are getting much more recognised now, the sunflower lanyards, and they can be really helpful. I wear one myself quite a lot. So yeah, if you see somebody with a sunflower lanyard, it might be their way of symbolising that they have accessibility needs that aren't immediately visible. There's also things like the Please Offer Me a Seat card if you're on public transport. Some of my badges over there, actually, if you want to nick any, say I have an energy limiting condition. Sometimes little things like that can be a really neat and energy efficient way of disclosing your disability without it being a whole big shebang. So just accessing the things you need as you go about your day without having to do the whole TED talk about your disability story, and all of that. I reckon if we haven't got any more, I reckon we leave it there. So I will just say again, thank you very much for being here today. I really appreciate your time and energy in being here. Come and have a nosy and get some freebies if you want. Like I said, no pressure to buy whatsoever, but I'm going to loiter around for a bit. And thank you in particular to those of you who've joined online. I really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you very much, everyone.